Hello and welcome to the Donlon Report. We start with breaking news tonight. We have conflicting reports on the whereabouts of the parents of the suspected Michigan school shooter, Ethan Crumbley. This all comes after the Oakland County prosecutor announced both parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, are now facing 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. The question right now, where are they? We can tell you the U.S. Marshals are involved, as is the FBI. They are calling it a manhunt. Let's bring in NewsNation anchor Rudabeh Shahbazi now with the latest. Rudabeh?
So, Joe, we're just trying to make sense of where the parents are. They were charged with 4 counts, as you mentioned, of involuntary manslaughter. This is very rare for parents of children who committed an alleged crime to be charged. They are returning to the area to be arraigned, according to their attorney. The attorney says they're not actually on the loose, that the prosecutors held a press conference. Take a look at this statement. I think we have that the prosecutor held a press conference without telling them. He said the Crumbleys left town on the night of the tragic shooting for their own safety. They are returning to the area to be arraigned. They are not fleeing from law enforcement despite recent media reports. But the sheriff says that they are on the loose, that they don't know where they are. And the FBI is now involved, and the U.S. Marshals also confirming that they are involved in the search. Joe.
All right, Rudabeh, thank you very much for the update. Joining me now, former federal and state prosecutor Pat Brady. Pat, how unusual is this? I mean, wouldn't you normally have a time set up to turn yourself in?
If you're going to self-surrender, the attorney, your attorney normally calls up the prosecutor, the sheriff, whomever, says, we're going to report at 4 o'clock. We'll have our guys there. In this case, the attorney is saying that they're coming in, but law enforcement is saying something else. The reason it's relevant is if this does actually go to trial, this is called consciousness of guilt. You don't flee unless you have a consciousness of you did something wrong. So this is really, I mean, the defense attorney is doing just what they had to do, but it's very unusual that there's not a meeting of the minds between the prosecutor and the defense. This, remember, OJ did this. They were supposed to report and took off. Is
this attorney-client privilege, or is there some way that maybe the attorney is not sure where they are exactly or when they might show up?
Well, he has an ethical obligation to be truthful in the statements he makes. You have to take him at his word that they are coming back. Now, I don't know if that's accurate or not, but law enforcement is saying there's still a manhunt. So if there's still a man, we'll know in the next few hours.
Right. Unusual to be sure.
Oh,
Pat,
sure.
We're going to ask you to sit tight for just a second, because it has, in fact, been a very busy and productive day in Oxford, Michigan. A number of developments that we are going to begin with right now. And it starts with what is the pulse of America tonight. How did this happen? How did a 15-year-old open fire in his Michigan school, killing 4 students and injuring 7 more? Well, tonight, we do have a much clearer picture of exactly how it did happen, and it is rather stunning. Ethan's parents, again, each facing 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, and it has led the nation to ask, how did someone not see this coming?
I want to be really clear that these charges are intended to hold the individuals who contributed to this tragedy accountable, and also send a message that gun owners have a responsibility. When they fail to uphold that responsibility, there are serious and criminal consequences.
So how can the parents be responsible? Well, after hearing the prosecutor lay out the case, some of you might wonder how they aren't facing more serious charges. 4 days before the shooting, James Crumbley, the father of Ethan, took his 15-year-old son to a gun shop and legally bought a 9mm handgun. Not for him, but for his son. Prosecutors say Ethan and his mother both posted pictures on social media. Ethan showing the gun, saying, "Got my beauty." His mom referencing Ethan's Christmas present. So fast forward 4 days to the day of the shooting. The school called Ethan's parents for an urgent meeting at the school. One of his teachers had found a note Ethan had written with a drawing of a gun, a person who had been shot, and the words, "Blood everywhere, the thoughts won't stop, help me." After that meeting at the school, the parents didn't want Ethan removed from the school. They left, and Ethan was sent back to class.
I'm not going to give you a political answer, and I'm not going to cover for anybody, and I'm just going to say what I think, and that is, of course he shouldn't have gone back to that classroom. Of course he shouldn't have. He should not have been allowed to go back to that class. And I believe that that is a universal position.
Later, after hearing about the school shooting, the prosecutor says Jennifer texted her son saying, "Don't do it."
Doesn't just impact me as a prosecutor and a lawyer, it impacts me as a mother. The notion that a parent could read those words and also know that their son had access to a deadly weapon that they gave him is unconscionable, and I think it's criminal.
So how in the world could anyone in that meeting at the school, based on what they had seen and heard, how could anyone think it was okay to send that student back to class with his backpack, where prosecutors now believe Ethan had the gun? If that were your child, knowing what you knew, how could you sit in that meeting and not ask yourself and your son, where is the gun? They apparently didn't.
The conclusion I draw is that there was absolute reason to believe this individual was dangerous and disturbed.
All right, let's bring back Pat Brady now. That was a lot to listen to today, Pat. And as the prosecutor laid it out, our jaws were sort of on the floor. What was your reaction to this?
The same. I watched the way she laid it out. I mean, and clearly this is charged correctly. They should have been charged with something. They're charged with involuntary manslaughter.
We mentioned, though, that there were some, after hearing all of this, who wondered why they weren't charged with more.
Yeah, I think she appropriately charged. And it's a pretty aggressive charge. It's never really been charged in one of these mass shootings like this. I think she's correct. But there's two different intent elements in a criminal trial. They charged them with involuntary manslaughter, meaning they behaved recklessly that caused a death. They didn't charge them with murder like they did with their son. Two different intent elements, much higher intent element in the murder side. I think she did it correctly and the smart way to do it.
You mentioned relevance as well. This was definitely, if not rare, certainly unusual.
To charge like this?
Yes.
Yeah, she's actually, in the underlying charges against the son, she actually threw in terrorism charges against him, which I've never seen. And Michigan has one of the few states that has this kind of law. And actually, it makes a lot of sense that there's other people in that room that were terrorized by what this kid did. So those have, the terrorism charges have penalties equal to the murder charges, I think.
All right, so we heard the case laid out today. How strong is the case for involuntary manslaughter, do you think?
I don't have all the facts, but from what I heard today, they have a pretty solid case. And if these people are actually in the wind like the law enforcement says they are, it just got stronger.
You told me just before we went on the air that you were a little concerned, as impressed as you were with this prosecutor, that there were some personal injections into some of what she said today. We heard a little bit of it today when she mentioned about how this has impacted her, not only as a prosecutor, not only as a lawyer, but as a mother.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not criticizing her at all. I think she's done a tremendous job, and she is a tremendous prosecutor, and she's a tremendous politician. She won in a Democratic primary. But the point is, with being a prosecutor, you're supposed to apply the law dispassionately. So your personal feelings really don't enter into it. Here are the facts, which are bad enough. You don't need to inject because you're a mother or a father or whatever. I think I'm not faulting her for that. This is brutal and a horrible crime. But I think a prosecutor has to stay above that and just apply the law to the facts.
What do you make of the school's liability? Because the prosecutor made a point of saying everyone who had anything to do with potentially stopping this will be held accountable. Where is the school on that? Because I'm sure you have kids.
Yeah.
What would you be thinking right now, hearing what you heard about what they knew and what they had learned leading up to this and what ultimately happened?
Yeah, it's a close call, but I bet they have all the facts, and I think they looked at and charged the parents appropriately. I think the school is just outside the circle of criminal liability. There certainly might be civil liability, a wrongful death suit or whatever, but I think the school, they reacted certainly better than the parents did. They reacted quickly. Maybe they should have checked the backpack, but that's not going to get you into reckless behavior that is going to get you charged with. You can do a lot of things that aren't great and not be charged criminally. Criminal law is a whole different element.
Well, the other thing that's interesting is this is Michigan, and it does have some interesting laws that come into play here. People might wonder, well, where was the gun? And as we understand, the gun was just kept unlocked in a drawer at the house, and the son Ethan had access to it, and that's legal in Michigan, as I understand it.
Yeah, it's different. I think there are 30 states where that's not legal. But the point is, even where it's not legal, it's rarely charged. I was doing some research before I came over. It's only been charged 4 or 5 times where they actually charged the parents because they didn't lock it up and it led to something else. So this is just maybe one example of the law evolves, the prosecution evolves. Maybe we're waking up to more effective ways to prosecute. Put these parents on the hook. Maybe some of these kids are kept out of school before they do stuff like what they did here.
Well, we've seen it. I mean, schools across Michigan are closed right now because of all of the threats that have come in copycat-wise after this. Pat Brady, always great to have your voice. Thank you very much for the time. Joining me now for more is NewsNation's Ashleigh Banfield. Ashleigh, let's pick it up there because there was just sort of a shocking nature to this news conference today, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of these from prosecutors. What was your thought today after watching this?
Well, you know, I can't imagine not being human. Hearing that fact pattern that was laid out by this state attorney. I understand what Pat Brady was saying. You're supposed to be dispassionate, but this was ugly. I mean, I am sure, Joe Donlon, you had the same reaction that I had when you heard the text message that was sent to Ethan by his mom right after she received voicemail and email saying your son was buying ammo.
Right.
And her response was not to the school. She ghosted the school. Instead, she said to Ethan, LOL, I'm not mad. You have to learn not to get caught. If I were prosecuting this case against Jennifer Crumbley, I would put that on a giant sandwich board at the front of the courtroom facing the jury saying, read that over and over again and ask yourself, is this reasonable behavior, especially in light of the information she learned the day of the shooting. I think it is just astounding. And Joe, where I think this really comes into play is the emotion of the community. You mentioned it. Michigan has different kinds of laws, but they're also human beings. And it's going to be like the gun rights advocates versus Pitchfork Nation, because even gun rights advocates get steaming mad when they hear about parents saying things like that, and when they see other kids losing their lives to a kid like that who had parents like that. This will be a fascinating socio-ecological study.
Wow. You know, it's important, Ashleigh, on the timeline to point out this text that you mentioned actually happened the day before the shooting. And then there was the text the day of the shooting when it was clear there was a school shooting at that school. The mother clearly understood that her son was likely involved and sent the text, please don't do it. Detailing all of this, Ashleigh, the prosecutor said we should all be angry. You think about the parents who sent their kids to school that day and then hearing what happened. You have two teenagers. What would be going through your mind knowing what happened in the end?
Well, I was angry just listening to the fact pattern, and as I'm sure you are, and everybody who's watching right now, unless you don't have a heartbeat, you should have been angry too. Because honestly, if that school couldn't have done something, if those parents weren't prepared to do their job, at least the school could have protected my kid. Now, granted, the school didn't know they went and bought that gun. Granted, they didn't know that, you know, the gun was in a loose drawer in Jennifer and James's bedroom, and it was a gift to a kid. P.S. That's a straw buyer right there. Watch out for federal charges. They didn't know all that, but they did know what they knew, and that was that this kid had some deranged thoughts he'd written on paper, and he'd been brought into the principal's office to meet his parents about it. I'm pretty sure that they did have a right to keep him out of the classroom. I'm pretty sure they did have a right to call the police and say, we're not comfortable here. And Joe, I'm just going to go out on a limb here. I think that they better get a wheelbarrow and they better fill it full of money for all the wrongful death suits, civil lawsuits that are coming their way from those 4 kids' parents, and then the other suits that are coming from the 7 who were injured for life.
Yeah, Ashleigh, you hear all the time, see something, say something. In this case, I mean, it seems like several people who saw something and didn't say something. I mean, we can go back even to the social media posts where he's posing with the gun, calling it my beauty. And, you know, early on we heard, well, you know, be careful with all these social media stories you're hearing. But now, I mean, when these things happen, we always wonder, how did we not see it coming? This is one we should have seen coming right down the expressway.
And let's be really clear. There is a very different culture in Michigan about gun ownership, and that has to be respected. You have a legal right to own firearms. You do not have a legal right to give one of them to your 15-year-old if you told the store it's yours. That is what James Crumbley apparently did on Black Friday with that kid beside him. And then the kid posts, look at this, it's mine. And mom says, Christmas present, look at this. That is what you call illegal behavior, dangerous behavior, reckless behavior, and in a court of law that will come back to bite you where the sun don't shine.
Ashleigh, do you believe the parents are on their way back in, or do you think they're still missing?
All I could say when I saw that they were on the lam was, do they not know they have a 15-year-old who's locked up right now who needs them? Do they not realize that that kid needs them for every single bit of his life? That kid's about to get locked up for the rest of his life. Where the hell are they? Where were they before the shooting? Where are they right now? This is insane behavior on their part. And do not give me this lawyer BS that they're just out, making sure that they're safe right now. I wish they'd felt about the safety of the kids who died as much as they fear for their safety right now.
Well, where they are right now, Ashleigh, is missing, to your point, and what they're looking at potentially, if found guilty on these involuntary manslaughter charges, 15 years. Ashleigh Banfield.
That's per charge, Joe.
Right.
That's per charge. And if they're consecutive, it's 60.
Okay. All right. Well, much more coming from Ashleigh Banfield tonight. You can see it. It's called Banfield. It's 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, right here on NewsNation. Ashleigh, thanks for the time. Passionate as always. Appreciate it.
Someone is responsible for what happened, and I can't say who that is, but I know it's not me.
Alec Baldwin says he is not to blame for the shooting of his cinematographer on the movie set of Rust. He also says he didn't pull the trigger. And that's not all. Much more of that interview and reaction from our expert stunt scientist coming up. Don't forget to follow us on social media at the Donlon Report on Twitter. Back after this with much more. We are back. The Senate voting to avoid a shutdown despite conservative Republicans urging a delay over the president's vaccine mandates. That didn't happen. West Virginia centrist Democrat Joe Manchin saying, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and as the new Omicron variant emerges, I will not vote to shut down the government for purely political reasons. There's too much at stake for the American people. Republican New York Congressman Tom Reed joins us again. Congressman, it's great to see you. Call me crazy, but that almost sounded like leadership. That's not something we're used to hearing in Congress these days.
I got to appreciate Senator Joe Manchin. Got to know him pretty well. He's become a great friend, and I just tell you, he says it the way it needs to be said. That we're not going to play politics with this. We're going to stand for what we believe in. He's going to stand for what he believes in. Oppose the vaccine mandate, but don't play politics. Shut down the government. That type of actions are just not productive for the American people.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Manchin at first here, because the thing that's interesting is he continues to sort of frustrate people on both sides, which really makes you wonder if that is what leadership's all about. I mean, he says, to our point, he's not going to vote to shut down the government for purely political reasons, but then he sides with Republicans saying he opposes mandates. We should incentivize, not penalize, private employers to protect their employees. To me, it seems like leadership is almost about doing what's best for everyone, even if you don't agree with all of it.
Totally agree with that. That's what serves people best in life, and it should serve us best in Congress, because you never get 100% of what you want in life, and you don't get that in Congress. And the better policies are always those that are taken with input from the other side by listening. But at the end of the day, standing firm for what you believe in, and at the right time and place, putting that marker down so that when the vote comes up, you can stand behind that vote and actually move the needle rather than playing political theater.
Right. The right time and place, I guess, is an interesting point, Congressman. And this is one of the reasons we like talking to you, because unfortunately you're leaving because of a lot of the rancor and frustration that you've experienced in Congress. But I guess my question was, when I heard about this vaccine mandate opposition, I thought, hasn't this been settled in the courts? I mean, we had one of the owners of the businesses that fought this thing and ultimately got it thrown out in courts, and OSHA has said they're not even going to pursue it. So why not take yes as a win?
Absolutely. I mean, because you do have the yes, and you have the situation and practical purposes where it's at, then look at the legislative vehicle for a backup plan. But use the legislative vehicle where you have the votes to pass what the position is, and use it at the right time and place, because then you can actually get it enacted. Actually just fighting to die on a hill is nothing we should be doing in Washington, D.C. What we should be doing is looking long-term, taking positions that are supported by a vast majority of people across the nation, and then get the elected officials to have to stand with you if they don't want to do it. Make sure the politics line up so the policy can get done.
Right. I guess the other question after watching this is, it felt like we were sort of, the little boy who cried wolf. I just almost got to the point last night where I didn't even really want to cover the shutdown threat, because we all knew this was going to get figured out. I guess the question is, why does it take this kind of, gumming up the works, I guess, every time? It seems like we're doing this every year, at least once or twice a year.
That's why I tell my colleagues often, get out from the DC bubble, get out and talk to the American people. The American people are laughing at Congress right now. They are so disappointed. Look at our job approval numbers with Congress historically. It's because they talk to themselves, they listen to an echo chamber, and at the end of the day, they're not listening to the American people. And I tell you, that's the day of reckoning that's coming for our colleagues in Washington, D.C., and in Congress itself, is the American people are saying enough is enough, and we're going to throw everybody out of the institution and give it a clean, fresh start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit later about a new poll that talks about how the younger generation is so disenfranchised with our democracy. They either think it's failed or it's not working. And I think when you look at politics, you have to blame that for at least some of this, right, Congressman? I mean, we talked about violent anime videos. You have death threats among members. You know this all too well, who voted in favor of the infrastructure plan. You have really, I guess, just sort of vulgar Twitter fights now that are going on among Congress members in their own party. I mean, people have to look at this and say, what is wrong with this?
Totally agree with that. And we should all be concerned as elected officials in Washington, D.C., that if the next generation has such cynicism already, is already losing its faith in the institution of Congress, I will tell you, that's a problematic sign that we should be joining hands on both sides of the aisle, say enough is enough. We can be proud Republicans, proud Democrats, but inspire the next generations to stay involved.
Well, we're going to talk with some young folks on both sides of the aisle a little later on in the broadcast. But in the meantime, it's always great to have your voice. Congressman Tom Reed, good to see you. Thanks for the time. Enjoy the weekend.
It's great to be with you. Thanks so much, John.
You bet. Also coming up, gas prices. They've actually come down a little bit, but they are still sky high from where they were last year. We're going to talk a little bit about that and also the latest job numbers. That's ahead. Plus, Alec Baldwin says he's not to blame for the shooting of his cinematographer on his movie set. He also says he didn't pull the trigger. Again, more from that interview he gave to ABC last night coming up. And to all our viewers out there, we want to thank you for making NewsNation the fastest growing cable news network in the country. We appreciate it, and we'll be right back.
People, they have their dreams. No matter how old you are, you have your dreams of people you want to work with. And this movie made me love making movies again. I really thought we were onto something.
Actor Alec Baldwin got emotional as he gave his first interview since a gun he was holding on the movie set Rust went off, killing the film's cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. There were several revelations in the exclusive interview with ABC. And joining us now to talk more about that, let's bring in our good friend, theatrical firearms safety expert and CEO of Pyro Nemesis, Steve Wolf. Steve, you and I talked last night about this whole claim that he hadn't pulled the trigger. Before we get into any of your on-point demonstrations that you want to get to, let me just ask you about the interview itself. What stood out to you?
I think the most horrible part was to see someone who had been part of the death of an innocent person say that they felt no guilt or no remorse, but strictly were on the hunt for, who planted the mysterious ammo. And I can't imagine that even if I was 1% responsible for something like this, that I wouldn't have tremendous guilt and sorrow about it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Steve, you say that. As I watched the interview last night, when Stephanopoulos asked that question, you feel sadness, you feel sorrow, do you feel guilt? In my mind, I thought, well, how could you not? But it made me wonder, too, if maybe there are some legal reasons, because he steered clear of guilt and responsibility. He did talk a little bit about it. Let's listen to this clip, and I'll get your comment after.
You felt anger. You felt sadness. Do you feel guilt?
No. I feel that there is. I feel that someone is responsible for what happened, and I can't say who that is, but I know it's not me. I mean, I honest to God, if I felt that I was responsible, I might have killed myself if I thought I was responsible.
So, Steve, I mean, this is an interesting point, but I guess when you have the gun in your hand and it goes off, is there some responsibility at least?
There's ultimate responsibility, because the gun laying on a table won't hurt anyone. The gun loaded with live nuclear missiles won't hurt anyone. It's when you point it at someone and you press the trigger that it becomes deadly. And he's the one who did both of those things.
Yeah, he's taken some heat from other actors too, Steve, who I know George Clooney has weighed in on this, and others as well beforehand, who've said, you know, you never point a gun at someone. In fact, he talked about that as well during the interview. Let's listen to that.
People said to me, I got countless people online saying, you idiot, you never point a gun at someone. Well, unless you're told it's empty, and it's the director of photography who's instructing you on the angle for a shot we're going to do.
So, Steve, you've been on a lot of sets. Is that unusual? I mean, I understand that there has to be an element of trust, right? With the
Yeah, Joe, we're going to rewrite the gun safety rules. Instead of saying all guns are always loaded, we're going to say all guns are always loaded unless someone tells you they're not. And then instead of saying, you know, we never point guns at people, we have to add now, unless a cinematographer tells you to. Well, the 4 basic, simple gun safety rules have worked, you know, for hundreds of years to keep people from getting hurt. And they are the cornerstone of gun safety on any set or any circumstance. And they can't be rewritten. You can't add conditions to them or they don't work. If someone says point a gun at you, do you do it? No, because you run the risk that you're going to shoot them. And it doesn't matter if they're a cinematographer or not. You tell the cinematographer, if I do what you asked, I would be pointing a gun at you. Is it possible for you to step to the side, go off in Video Village, monitor this, you know, monitor your shot, and then you can still give me the same directions without me pointing the gun at you? Mm-hmm. Absolutely, things like that could happen. And then, you know, he knows the difference between a safe set and an unsafe set. And he revealed that last night. He talked about working on professional movie sets where there was an armorer who comes over and says, hey, everybody, this is the gun that we're going to be working with. It's a 45 long Colt single action revolver. Here's how we open it. Here's how we show that all the cylinders are unloaded. I'm going to show this to the director, show this to the actor, show this to the crew. Then they show you, you know, I'm rattling the BBs.
Right. So you know it's a fake.
He walked through that process of what it looks like. So when none of those things were happening on his set, because the armorer wasn't even there, he must have noticed a contrast between the way it's done when it's done right and the way it's done when it's done on his set. So to say that he didn't know things were unsafe because his crew didn't tell him makes no sense when he himself could see that the safety practices that he was used to weren't being followed.
Well, the one question he did bring up, which I think everyone can agree with, is how in the world did that live ammunition end up on that set when it wasn't supposed to? Steve Wolf, it's always great to have you.
I don't think that's a mystery. I think they were shooting those guns recreationally earlier in the day.
Okay.
You know, they had gone out back behind the set up some tin cans, shot at them, left the ammo in the gun, put the gun back on the tray, and then no one checked the gun. Not the armorer, not the AD, and not the actor.
Yeah. All right, Steve Wolf, again, it's always great to have you. Appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Joe. Take care.
You bet. Now, back on getting America to work, some economists suggesting federal vaccine mandates might have something to do with this. In November, the U.S. economy created 210,000 new jobs. However, and here's the rub here, economists were forecasting about 573,000 new jobs. Business journalist Shivani Joshi joins us now. What do you make of that, Shivani? I mean, is there enough in that pool who are not going to get vaccinated to move the needle this much?
I've been looking into the numbers today. Thanks for having me, Joe. And my take on this is it is a smaller part of the story, and there are many more factors at play here. What we have today is a very mixed job reaction or a job report here. Some news was to the upside. The unemployment rate is almost at a level that people would say is full employment. But on the flip side, we came in at a six-figure miss with the jobs number. I think that the vaccine mandate is just a small portion of the story here.
So what's the big portion?
So the big portion is one. The good news and the upside is that people who were coming to the workforce to find a job, they found those jobs. They weren't coming to the market and saying, I can't find a job. And that's why we're seeing good unemployment numbers. What we're still seeing is a good proportion of the American workforce that is available to work, not coming in to work. Why are the reasons? One, wages are not keeping up with inflation. We've talked about inflation being at a 30-year high and wages not keeping up. You see this reflected in lower than expected impacted numbers in the retail sector and the hospitality sector, in restaurants and other more lower paying sectors. The other thing that you have is that, I come on here and I talk a lot about women's participation in the workforce as well. That came in, women only getting 36% of the jobs in the last month. So you still have women tentative on the sidelines, and this doesn't even take into the account the newest COVID variant here. We're going to see that start to work into the numbers this month.
Yeah, I was going to point that out too, because as you mentioned, this was before the Omicron concerns, which we'll talk about with you in a second here. But with this 4.2% number, normally that would be great news, right? But to your point, it also does not take into consideration the people who have either stopped looking for work or have just willingly dropped out of the job market.
Right. And that is sort of a statistics number that always gets taken into account when we come up with the job number. If we have 1,000 people in the workforce and 400 people get jobs, you have the statistic of 40%. If you get 40 over 100, you still have the number of 40%. It doesn't give you an apples to apples comparison. And that is what we're continuing to face headwinds is we have people that are on the sidelines because of wage issues, because of health concerns, because of childcare issues, because they want better wages and better packages, including sick leave. And then you're not just seeing it in these industries like the retail industry and the restaurant industry, where that isn't typically part of the compensation.
Right. And we've talked before, Shivani, just about how many people are quitting their jobs. We've talked about Resignation Nation. And I mean, it's been millions of people a month, which is just staggering. But let's get you on Omicron before we let you go, Shibani. Wasn't included, as we mentioned, in the November numbers, but what do you think it will mean moving forward? And how might that continue to impact the labor market?
Well, there's no question it's going to impact it. We're already seeing it starting to happen in the retail numbers. I mean, we looked at Black Friday numbers, people coming into the stores and even shopping online were flat from a year ago. Retail is looking at the most busiest season, most impactful season. They're not able to get workers in to man the show floors. And so that is a concern. Consumer spending is expected to still be positive. That is a positive thing. But we're just always concerned about this variant, and we already have an economy, a consumer, and a workforce that is tentative. People who were worried about the variant before are certainly going to stay out of the workforce again for the foreseeable future.
All right, business journalist Shivani Joshi, it's always great to have you. Enjoy the weekend. Take care.
Thanks, you too.
Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida wants to form his own state army that he's in charge of. Can that happen? And is that as odd as it sounds? Brian Etten joins us with more on that coming up. And a poll shows more than half of young people have a negative view of our democracy. We have both sides on that coming up. We'll talk about that here each. Tell us what's great about this country as well as what's wrong. That's ahead. Here's a number we've been discussing on this program, and we want to dig into it a little further tonight. More than half, 52% of young Americans say democracy in America has failed or is in trouble. That is a supermajority. Meantime, only 7% from the same age group say our democracy is healthy. So what is going on? Why are young people losing so much faith in our democracy? Let's pose the question to our next guest, Quentin Wathum-Ocama, president of the Young Democrats of America, and Emily Jashinsky, culture editor at the Federalist. Quentin, let's start with you. What do you make of this poll? Why are the younger set losing faith?
You know, honestly, I think it's two things. We've seen a real erosion of our democratic norms the past few years. And young people, there's a lot of stresses, housing, student loans, climate change. And we're not seeing anybody delivering for us. So I think it's really a mix of those two is folks are just, they're not feeling it. They're not feeling the things that make this country great and the democratic institutions that are supposed to provide for us.
Emily, what do you think? America is said to be the great experiment, and to the younger set, it's failing. How do you explain it?
There's a really interesting trend recently where the left and the right increasingly agree on the reasons that there is so much pessimism, I think, especially among young people. You can go back actually to 9/11, which is what the shadow of what today's young people grew up in. They were then hit with the Great Recession, or their families were hit with the Great Recession. They're being pushed into a system where they're filtered through higher education almost unanimously, and that involves taking out tens of thousands of dollars of student loans loans. On average, you have the student graduating with something like 30,000 student loans, which puts home ownership and marriage out of reach. So it's hard to see why young people today would look at the country as healthy, quote, healthy, with the past 20 years in the rearview mirror.
Well, it's interesting. Yesterday when we talked about this, they also talked about education costs and school loans. I think most people probably equate it with more political, but it's interesting that you both brought it up as well. I would wonder, do you think, Quentin, that people in the younger generation feel left out of the process? And in other words, they're feeling sort of alienated because most politicians are older?
You know, I do think that plays an important factor. I see, we look at what's happening in Washington or even our own state capitals. We see older politicians talking, discussing, and making decisions where young people really aren't just at the table. And I think particularly inaction around some of those things that you mentioned, especially student loans, just makes people feel like they're out of the process, that that things aren't working, that this isn't sustainable. And I think that's where you start to see that that pessimism about democracy and the future of it, because the system isn't working for a lot of young people right now.
So, Emily, take us to a college course. If you were there, what would your case be talking to these kids who think our democracy is failing?
I mean, I would say that's entirely reasonable. I think that's one of the points about institutional distrust is we decry it and we say this is so bad, and it's bad, right? But it's also good because at this moment in time, it's reasonable. And to have a level of institutional distrust and to feel like the country is failing is actually much better than being complacent and thinking the country that is in great, healthy shape right now, because it's not. And that's something, that reality is something that everybody needs to wake up to and be motivated to get it back. And finally, I'd just say, look at what we have been at our best and look at what we can be when we improve on that, because you have to have a healthy dose of optimism to take that motivation and do something with it.
Right. It's a great point, Emily. And Quentin, I'll let you jump onto it there, because there's certainly a perception, I think, or maybe a misperception that we're kind of swirling down the drain these days. But by most metrics you might use to measure success, we're doing pretty well.
Yeah, we are doing pretty well. I think it's just how are we creating an environment where people are feeling included, and especially our young people, and we are showing that the American experiment and the democracy is really a tool for us to better our lives and have the future that we all want to have. And I think, honestly, I'm pessimistic myself, but I think if we can start delivering for young people, we can make sure that we're also protecting our democratic institutions, voting rights, making sure that we're tackling gerrymandering. I have hope. I'm not somebody who is saying that I'm not putting my cards in yet.
Yeah, Emily, do you have hope?
I always have hope. I'm a Christian, so I always have hope, but I do also feel enormously pessimistic as well.
Hope
so
and
it's
faith.
a little bit of both.
All right, hold on to it. It's great to get your comments on this tonight, both of you. Quentin Wathum-Ocama and also Emily Jashinsky. Thanks for the time, both of you. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Leland Vittert joins us now, top of the hour. On Balance, what do you have?
We're talking about safe spaces.
Okay.
Yeah, and now there are safe spaces to smoke crack cocaine.
Oh, yeah, New York?
New York City's got them. Yeah, there you go. It's interesting. Even the community activists who you'd think would be for sort of this idea of decriminalizing drugs and allowing it to come into the mainstream, they're some of the most ardent opponents to it because of what it brings into their neighborhoods. We're going to talk to one.
So, on the other hand, obviously the knee-jerk reaction to this is you got to be kidding me, right? But, yeah. Is it really that far removed from giving free, clean needles? And is it an opportunity to maybe get these folks face-to-face in a very personal relationship to try to get them help?
Great argument made for it. Is it worth the cost to the community of bringing in drug users and drug dealers? Because obviously drug dealers go to where their customers are, into these communities that are really trying to bring themselves up by their bootstraps. So everything is a cost-benefit analysis. Then obviously we also talk about a little bit about the rules of New York, because there's mask mandates in New York, there's vaccine mandates in New York. If you want to go into a restaurant, is there a vaccine mandate to go into the safe space for crack?
I wondered if addicts would use it. And as we saw when it opened, there were lines out the door. So
it's enormous, yeah.
Yeah, all right. On Balance at the top of the hour with Leland. Thanks. We'll see you then. A heartwarming tribute to a little boy who died in the Waukesha Parade tragedy. It's gone viral now, and it's a great way to end the show and the week. That's coming up. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says he wants to bring back a World War II-era civilian military force in his state. But the governor says the Florida State Guard he's proposing would be controlled by his office, not the Pentagon. For more on this, let's go to NewsNation's Brian Etten live in Florida tonight. So why does he feel the need for this, Brian?
Well, it's interesting, Joe, and I know when you first hear it, it does sound weird, but there are 22 other states that do have these state guards. DeSantis says basically he wants it because he says he'd be able to respond to disasters very, very quickly. Of course, the National Guard right now is controlled by the feds, so everything has to go through them. And he says with a state guard, he could make the calls and send the guard to respond to hurricanes and things like that almost immediately. Listen to what the governor said earlier.
I'm going to be recommending in the budget $3.5 million to reestablish the Florida State Guard. This funding will support the necessary training, equipment, and other support functions for up to 200 members who can aid in the response to hurricanes, natural disasters, and other state emergencies. We want to be able to have a quick response.
So the interesting thing here, Joe, is this announcement came just days after the Pentagon made clear that the National Guard members in Florida had to have the vaccine as part of their vaccine mandate in terms if they want to get paid. So a lot of Democrats are saying this is just DeSantis' way of saying, look, if they have to have the vaccine, I'm going to start my own state guard and I won't require the vaccine. Charlie Crist, the Florida congressman who's running for governor, he tweeted out in response to this, no governor should have his own hand-picked secret police.
We'll see where it goes. Brian Etten live for us tonight in Florida. Thanks, Brian. Take care. Tonight's American Snapshot is a bittersweet story relating to something we covered in detail last month, the Waukesha Christmas Parade tragedy. Today, that city and the nation coming together to honor one of the victims, 8-year-old Jackson Sparks. People across the country dressed in baseball jerseys, posting selfies with the hashtag Jerseys for Jackson. Jackson was a baseball player himself. That's where the jerseys come from. Our hearts certainly go out to him and his family after this devastating loss. Maybe Jackson able to bring some light to a dark situation there in Waukesha and beyond. And that is our American Snapshot tonight. Thank you for your time. We appreciate you watching. Have a good night and a great weekend on Balance with Leland Vittert. Next. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.